Power on.
The following is a presentation of the Sovryn Tech podcast feed.
Fellow delegates, this last week, we've seen what humans can be at their worst. But we must not, use that as an excuse to end the dream that began here. For then, the demons of our past will have won. Instead, I want to look to the future and begin by honoring the people responsible for our being here tonight. They represent all of us at our best.
Up until about 100 years ago, there was one question that burned in every human, that made us study the stars and dream of traveling to them. Are we alone? Our generation is privileged to know the answer to that question. We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores. Yet, the more I've experienced, the more I've learned that no matter how far we travel or how fast we get there, the most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other. The final frontier begins in this hall. Let's explore it together.
From days of long ago, from uncharted regions of the universe, comes a legend. The Legend of Sovryn Tech, podcast of the universe. A mighty tech show, loved by anarchists, feared by authoritarians. As Sovryn Tech's legend grew, peace settled across the galaxy. On planet Earth, a union of egoists was formed. Together with the open source, retro gaming, and liberty-loving communities, they maintain peace throughout the universe. Until a new horrible menace threatened the galaxy. Sovryn Tech was needed once more. This is the podcast of super host Dr. Brian Sovryn. Specially trained and sent out into the galaxy to bring back Sovryn Tech, podcast of the universe.
Ooh, you wanted some of the best in podcasting today? What the hell am I talking about? You wanted the best in podcasting today, and that's why you're here. With me, Dr. Brian, smarter than your ass, Sovryn, the Golden Stallion, the Man of Tomorrow, Savzu, the Rated R, Radio Star, the man that some call the most dangerous person in the world today. And what do we got lined up for this episode of Sovryn Tech? A lot of things to get into. You know, it's a funny thing. It's actually, I've been just in, well, I'll say for research purposes. How about that? For research purposes. I was going back, you know, and back to the old back catalog. Not of Sovryn Tech, but of shows that I've listened to over a decade now. You know, I didn't really get into, real quick about me. So like the first, okay, no, this isn't true. The very first podcast I ever listened to was before podcasts, and I think even the iPod might not have even been a thing yet. The very first podcast I ever listened to was Digital Llama Radio. I've talked about this a lot. It was a kind of a Star Wars / geek show. But this was from, again, like, nobody else was doing this shit. This was way before. I mean, think of like the earliest podcast you can think of. And I guarantee you Digital Llama Radio was before that with Chris Hannell. Amazing. Not the first person with the last name Hannell that would, or with the initial C Hannell that would change my life in many ways. But that's besides the point. Anyway, I wouldn't really get into what would be more traditionally known as podcasts, because, they were named after the iPod. And if you remember, like the original, like the iPod Classic, of course, at the time it was just the 6th gen iPod. But if you remember, the iPod Classic actually had a feature, like, it's a software feature, but it was built into that specific hardware, right? Because it didn't really have apps, where you could speed up how fast you could listen to, audio files that you put on there. That was game-changing shit, in whatever that was, 2009, 2010. But the first podcast and it was actually, of course, it was also a national radio show, but that shows how far ahead of the game they were. First podcast I ever listened to was Free Talk Live. And in fact, it's still mind-blowing to me to this day in 2022 that, just come a year or two later, that I would end up becoming a first chair host, as in running the show. I would be a first chair host on Free Talk Live, just a couple years after that. That still blows my mind to this day that happened. Like you're just kind of fanboying out, in like 2009, 2010, whatever. And, and then 2011, and then, I moved to New Hampshire in 2011, and then holy shit, a few months later, hey, you want to be on the show? Yeah, sure. And then, a few months after that, hey, you want to try first chair? Yeah, sure. Incredible. Anyway, actually, I suppose it might have been like a year later that happened. But regardless, it wasn't long after that where like I got my first Android phone, and because again, I started listening to podcasts on an actual iPod, right? But then I ended up getting an Android phone, and then, you download a podcast app and holy shit, your world blows up and you go, wait a minute, there's like more of these? Like there's a ton of these fucking things. And, then you find the Twit Network. And of course, somebody who had been watching Tech TV, which would later become G4, Tech TV, his whole life. Yeah, you're going to go hang out with Leo Laporte, and then you see like friendly faces like Steve Gibson and whatever else. And of course, to this day, Steve Gibson, still has, in my opinion, the single greatest podcast on the planet. Like, just bar none. It is, if Cosmos is the reason for TV to exist, and I firmly stand by that statement, and if Cosmos is the greatest thing that the medium that is television has ever produced, and I stand by that statement, then Security Now is like the reason that podcasts exist, and it's still like the best thing that the podcast world has ever produced, just flat out. And let's just be clear about this. Steve Gibson is a fucking planetary treasure. People say national treasure. No, planetary treasure. Okay. And this kind of proves the point that I wanted to make in the opening here. Because I was going back and listening to like podcasts that really I haven't listened to in a few years, but are impressively, and I'll give them this, impressively, they're still around. But I was just kind of going through like what's it like right now? What's the what's the old podcast stomping grounds, sounding like these days? And I got to tell you, it's not good. It's not good. Even on the same network that Security Now is on, like things have just completely gone off the rails. And and some other shows, I mean, by people who are genuinely talented people. I was blown away to find out, like, even, again, I just kind of started recently picking up on some of this stuff. Blown away to find out, Windows Weekly hit their 900th episode and Mary Jo Foley left, which, I mean, congrats to her for getting whatever work that she's happy to go and do. But she was awesome. I mean, and hilarious too, right? Like how many of us just say Hadoop every now and then, and it's solely because of her. Just hilarious. But I don't know what's going on. I don't, like, do these people, I mean, is everybody just getting old? I mean, hey, I am too, I guess. I mean, I don't feel it. I feel fucking amazing, but like, what's the deal? I mean, but that's the problem. Like, you can't just say it's people getting old, because somehow Steve Gibson is still interesting as fuck, still as educational as fuck, and still like explaining things, however, well, I don't think it's 20 years, but what, 16, 17, 18 years, however long they've been going, and still taking all of us to school, and the guy's almost 70. Like, it can't be that. It can't just be that, like, that people are getting old or what. Is it just that, is it defeatist in the tech space? I mean, granted, I also went to go and listen to, podcasts outside of the tech world, just to kind of get a feel. But yeah, everybody, or not everybody, obviously, but many of the stalwarts in podcasting, honestly, they just sound really tired. And these are people who, as far as I know, it's not like they're in dire financial situations. It's not like they're, and if they were, I mean, I can empathize with them, but if they were, like, you think they'd be trying twice as hard. I don't get it. I don't know. Like everybody just sounds very bored, or they're doing like these weird hard pivots, like now you've got, capitalists that are communists, anarchists that are voting. I don't know. Like it's all very odd out there. Now, I mean, people evolve. Sure. Like there's nothing wrong with that. That happens. People are presented with, new research, new information or whatever, and maybe they go through some kind of change. Some people go fucking nuts with that kind of change. But I listen to this and I go, wow, like, it feels like a case where, you think of the great musician, who really had their time in the sun, and it's like, okay, you're done. You're done. Don't stay too long to the party. You're done. And I feel like a lot of people are just way too long to the party. Like, I wonder, what gives someone like real staying power? What is it? What's the magic that lets somebody do a podcast for, 10 years or more? And, there's nothing wrong with taking a little break or, changing things up a bit. But like, some of this stuff is just, fuck, it's so stale. And, some of these people you consider like, kind of standards of quality, and it's just not there anymore. It's, and it's not like, I mean, and I made sure to go back and listen. I'm like, oh, is it just like the past month? No, like I interspersed it, and it's been going on for like 2-3 years. And hey, you know what? The Coof fucked up a lot of shit. Let's all be clear on that. And I want to empathize with that too. And is that what changed everything up? Did everybody just get beaten down, from that? Maybe. But anyway, all of that said, just something I've noticed, but don't you worry, because Sovryn Tech is here, baby, and I still have all the energy of a nuclear power plant, ready to go, even over 10 years later, since I had started this show. Look, all right, real quick, you might be wondering, like, why am I even talking about this? Why am I bringing this up? Well, partly it's because podcasting is one of the last bastions of truth, or the ability anyway, and not saying the truth is out there, no X-Files quotes, Not saying that the truth is, inherently out there on podcasting. I'm just saying that it's one of the last places where you can get it out at scale. There are very few, outside of like books, and maybe if you're still saucy enough to do magazines or like email newsletters or something, it's just, there are becoming less and less platforms where you can reach out to a lot of people at once, and not be censored. And ultimately, this is one of them, if not the best for that. And it's just a shame to see so much fall away. But anyway, like I said, let's get into the foreplay. Let's get into, our opening stories. Of course, the foreplay is where we talk about all the little stories. And we got a little bit of a theme to run through on the foreplay. And then we've got a hell of a story of the week and a bit of a different listener's choice. Usually it's something I would end up talking about during the climax, but we'll get into it there. And, well, anyway, we've got a lot to get into. Let's do it. So opening it up, version 9 of Telegram. Of course, last week, Telegram was a major part of the conversation for the episode. It ended up being our story of the week. And, well, amazingly, Telegram kinda came out, released the feature. Now, we talked about last week that Pavel Durov had planned on having a Halloween treat for Telegram users, but that Apple was stopping up the drain on it, and keeping them from being able to release the feature broadly. I want to talk about that in a second. Okay, but let's say what they did. What they did is they released the feature that I think everybody was really looking for, is that true competitor to Telegram groups. What they allowed for is topics, which is essentially threaded posts, meaning you can say something and then people can all kind of like reply in a threaded fashion underneath and do whatever else. And then you can also, not only that, because channels on Telegram could do that, but the posts are still pretty ephemeral in that like they'll just disappear over time, or not, they don't actually disappear, but like every post that gets made, you'll have to comment on or whatever. As to where with and it would eventually disappear because more posts are being made. As to where topics, you could actually pin them to the top of a group. And so they could, they could be more evergreen. Like they could stay there instead of being, more ephemeral, like say in a channel. And then you could just keep commenting on those topics and you essentially have threaded posts in that way. This is probably the number next to emoji reacts, which of course Telegram did a little while ago. This is probably the most requested feature for Telegram to have, is something akin to threaded posts, which not only makes it a Facebook groups competitor, but then also kind of makes it a message board / Reddit kind of competitor, kind of. Now, I mean, you could flood, a group with topics, but I think at the same time, like, threaded conversations, threaded posts can run their course, but to have like a set amount of topics for a day or two, I think makes a lot of sense. Now, to be clear, there are some limitations on how this can get used. Right now, it can only be set up in groups that have 200 members or more. I am in some groups where these have already been set up, and it works pretty well. And you have to be updated both on desktop and particularly on, I'm not sure what the iOS versioning is. I think it's the same either way you go, but version 9 is what you want to be on. Now, great feature to add in. I mean, let's just be abundantly clear on that. And I know how, believe me, you can go listen to last week's episode. I know the critiques that I levied against them. We'll talk about alternatives in a minute in the rest of the foreplay. But, if you're on Telegram, like I said, last week, I am not going to be saying like, don't use this, don't use that, don't use this, don't use that, because everybody has such wildly different lifestyles, workflows, and frankly, or what could be considered corporate needs or, whatever for their work-life balance. Can you come out and ultimately say, don't use this, don't use that? I mean, again, if somebody fucks with your data, as in you lose it, then it's, kind of like Microsoft, then it's easy, to make the claim, screw that company. They lose my data. They lose my money. that's the end of the game, but also like, we don't want to be playing like as brand cheerleaders in any way either. But then at the same time, just a bit of a cooling off, because it's just, things are just so complex. And again, everybody has different individualistic needs as far as apps, software, hardware goes, as far as tech in general goes. So you use what works for you. Okay. There are certainly some things we would say don't use. Obviously, it's like, get the fuck off of Facebook properties already, please. But you get my point. So all of that aside, this is the right move. Now, this version 9 upgrade is probably what Apple was holding up, that they didn't approve, because as soon as it could get released, it got released. As far as, is there anything here that I think as to why Apple would have held it up? No, it doesn't appear to be anything like that, Apple would necessarily freak out about. But something that bothers me with this is, and I don't, maybe there's some kind of technical issue that I'm not aware of. Okay. And look, this is something else I want to be clear on. I do, when I am prepping for episodes of Sovryn Tech, and I do a lot of prep work. When I am prepping for episodes of Sovryn Tech, I do reach out to these companies to try and get a response from them. I often don't, and sometimes I know why, other times I don't know why. But I often don't, but I reach out to them to try and get answers on these things, because the tech press, as we know it, does not. Like, they really don't do their due diligence on these things. Or if they do try to, they don't tell us. But usually they do say when, hey, we reached out to this company for comment and we've yet to receive comment and blah, blah, blah. I try to find out from these companies what the deal is. So when I say that I don't know, I don't know how anyone else could. Like, if you're concerned, if someone's concerned that, like, well, you haven't verified what you're saying, A, I'm going to tell you when I'm speculating. B, I try to. And when a company is quiet, admittedly, I assume the worst. Because as we've talked about many times in this game, especially in the tech world, you assume malevolence. Especially when it's someone like Telegram, who is openly calling for regulation, legislation, and thus effectively government guns against whatever company that happens to be. Anyway, here's what bothers me with this. So, like, it seems like this, again, I'm guessing that version 9 with the topics feature, and there are some other things added, like new emoji packs for premium users and whatever else. Okay. It seems like version 9 is likely what they submitted to Apple, and that was not approved yet by Halloween, by October 31st, last Monday. And that would make sense. There, again, that is a major new feature for someone to look at. Again, it's nothing I think to have it held up over, but it is something to look into, certainly on Apple's part. My problem here, ultimately, is, so on Android, I use the independently installable APK from telegram.org. Okay, I don't even use the Google Play Store version. I use, again, the independent version off of their website. Now, one of the promises, and we covered this in, I guess it was 2021, when this was initially launched, okay, and I applauded Telegram for having, an independent APK that you can download, no App Store required. That's the right way to do things, or at least it should be an option. It was stated directly by Telegram, their own words, that that version would get, the independent APK would get the newest features, would get features even, or, would get features before any other version of Telegram, meaning any version in the Google Play Store or version in the iOS App Store. And they would get it sooner, and it would even get exclusive features that no other version of the Telegram app would have. Now, I think that's great because, again, as I said on Sovryn Tech at that time when that first got launched, I said this incentivizes people to get away from app repositories, which I think is great Nothing new for me to say. I've been saying that as long as we've been doing Sovryn Tech. And here's the problem. Like, there is no reason to wait to put out this topics feature for everyone. Or, like, there's no reason to hold it up on Android, because you can do the individual APK thing, just because Apple are being assholes. And they are. Like, I'll be clear about that. So, like, I've yet to see any real incentivization on Telegram's part of why you should download the independent APK. And I don't like that, essentially, Apple is holding everything up. Now, I don't like that, but even more so, I don't like that Telegram isn't living up to their promises and is effectively, like, making the rest of the Telegram community, especially the diehards who perhaps have a premium subscription, or not only that, also, independently install the APK as they wanted us to, that we're not getting any benefit out of that when we were told that we would. So the whole thing's a mess. And I don't know, maybe this is all just marketing, right? But don't put your users in a marketing position like that. Don't use your users, for your marketing horseshit. And that makes, for me, that feels worse than whatever Apple's doing. Just for me, your tolerances are different. But I feel like I'm essentially, and really every Telegram user is essentially being used as a weapon against Apple. Or at least a bargaining chip. And I'm not a bargaining chip. Just like I'm not a data point. And I thought you understood that. Telegram. Pavel Durov. Anyway, moral of the story. Pavel, just fuck Apple. Fuck iOS. Just fuck it. Stop the horse shit. You got a great product here, man. And you do. And you just came out with a killer feature. That is really going to put it over the top, I think, or can at least, of getting more people away from platforms that aren't as possibly or potentially respectful as Telegram is. And I say potentially respectful. Just leave them. Leave them. I don't get it. I don't get it why you're bothering. I know how big of a deal Apple is in the United States, but like, aren't you a global fucking company? And most of the world runs on Android because most of the world doesn't seem to fall so much prey to the, lifestyle obsession that Americans do. So just stop. But anyway, speaking of another company that in some ways is, and I hate to say this because I really think they're great, and it's still my top choice, even well over Telegram, for the best messaging app out there right now. But another company that, I mean, talk about like over-promising and kind of under-delivering. Threema. Threema, of course, is one of the, I would argue, is kind of the sleeping giant of messaging apps in the world right now. And we talked about this. Actually, it looks like by my notes, almost 4 years ago, and this is when Threema initially went fully open source, because before they were independently audited, or like audited by a third party. But they were not open source. Then they did finally go full open source, which bravo. And at that time when they went full open source, they laid out some other plans. Like they were saying, we're going to have an independent desktop app. We're going to have the ability to log in on multiple devices. We're going to have this, all these different features. And it has been largely radio silence, since that announcement. And it's been pretty disappointing because you can go through a web client, kind of similar to what WhatsApp had to do for a long time, where you can go through a web client, but then it's still using your smartphone's data connection, effectively meaning your smartphone still has to be on, which for me, at the end, like, look, I mean, I hate smartphones overall. Okay. Like that's not news to anybody. Okay. But a really great feature is when you can turn off your smartphone and your computer, which can be can be, again, keyword, can be, out of the box, different story, but can be a far more secure platform. Leave your smartphone behind or just have it turned off because fuck those notifications. But then, you could have, like, say, your favorite smartphone services, an app, a messaging app, a great one like Threema, say, which does so much right. Like, let's be clear here. They've still done great moves. Like some of the things they've developed in the past just couple months, have been phenomenal, right? Where like they don't need to use GMS for notifications, in particular, which I'm sure is part of developing this desktop version of the app. But anyway, like I want to be able to turn my smartphone off and yet still be able to use, my main messaging apps on my PC, right? So Threema Desktop 2.0, as it's officially called, it's been in development for years now. And it's another situation where I'm wondering, like, what's so hard here? Now, recently they've started tweeting about it, and it's only been in replies. Recently they've started tweeting about where things are at, what the development stage is at for that. And in fact, I'll read one right here. It says, we know that, and this is from today, as of this recording, what is it, November 7th? Here we go. We know that many users are eagerly awaiting multi-device support, and we're working hard on Threema 2.0 for desktop. Initial tests in conjunction with the iOS app were successful. We plan on releasing more news before the end of this year. Thank you for your patience. Definitely some patience. You're welcome. But yeah, so now it's interesting. Here's another situation, and I wonder about this. Speaking of with Telegram, with topics, and then what's happening with Threema 2.0 or Threema Desktop 2.0. iOS seems to be holding everybody up. This is a problem. Like there's a meta narrative there in and of itself that you got to wonder about. Like, what the fuck is Apple doing that's keeping these companies from evolving? It's not the 30% Apple tax that's doing that. There's some kind of wacky requirements that is keeping privacy respecting, potentially secure messaging apps. Threema is secure by design. Telegram, a little bit of a different story. From making such what I would argue would be such an incredibly basic thing like a desktop app. It's very strange. What's going on there. But regardless, Threema, again, still the best messaging app out there. Besides like Briar, but not everybody's going to use Briar, and there's, battery concerns with that and whatever. But still the best, still the ultimate messenger, as I titled it in 2021. And I'll certainly be keeping an eye on this, and I'll let you know when that comes out. We'll be doing a full review when that desktop app comes out, because this is something that really more people should be looking at, and I know they're not looking at it. In fact, this is fucking hilarious. I actually talked about this a little bit on the Patreon-only Sovryn Tech Discord group, which, Discord is what it is. There's no privacy whatsoever. You've got to keep that in mind. There is zero privacy, zero protection of your data. None, non-existent. And I'm not even necessarily saying that that's like a bad thing is a wrong term. I don't want to use, that's not the term that I want to go for. Like, everything should be encrypted in some form or fashion. Now, you could argue that, like their servers have, security in place, but there is no privacy, guaranteed in any way. And that's what's important to say here. Now, something that I'm kind of amused by is the amount of people that are celebrities, I should say. So I don't know that we should call them people, because they're not living on planet Earth. I don't know where the fuck they are, but they're certainly not on the ground. But celebrities are like, oh yeah, no. Leaving Twitter, going to Mastodon, because Elno fucking bought whatever. Fucking Elno. And, which, hey, I'm with you. Fuck that guy. And I was on that train way before any of these fucking celebrities were. I've been trashing Elno for fucking ever. So Elno Musk, does what he does. We're not going to talk about that here. But people are leaving, Twitter, seemingly in droves. I don't think that's actually happening. But they're going to Mastodon. Just, give me a fucking break. Give me a break. And the few people that I hear, of these talking heads or people that have some kind of fame who are talking about going over to Mastodon, they're like, oh, I'm having these incredibly intelligent conversations and all this stuff. And it's like, well, yeah, that's because there's not, a billion people on there. And so you can actually have more of a conversation. Also, for someone to be able to get on there, they have to have a little more technical know-how. So the intelligence level in general is higher. And also there probably aren't so many bots. There isn't so much spam. And because of its federated nature, it's actually kind of difficult to engage in advertising on there. And with its federated nature, you have like a lot of people moderating, and it's not, just one overarching, group at Twitter HQ. That's doing the moderation. But look, when Mastodon started getting developed, I mean, remember Quitter.no, right? I went on that. That was part of, Mastodon. And I mean, even had, and look, I'm not knocking, because like I even had conversations, email conversations, with the guy who's running, running that service, his little part of the Fediverse there. And like, look, just people aren't going to do it. And the reason people aren't going to do it is because they're likely not going to get, quasi famous on there, which is what everybody's hope is on Twitter, which is a nonsense hope. And also most people aren't going to be able to get over the technical hurdles of Mastodon. Now you could say that, well, now because of the concern, which, oh, fuck, whatever. Again, I'm not going to talk about it. No, I'm just not. Not here. Not about this. You want me to talk about his robot or something? That's pure bullshit too, but whatever. Okay. But like, if you're saying, well, now we have to learn, well, that's what I've been saying forever. Yeah, you're going to have, if you want services that you have more control over, that maybe has more security, privacy, or the ability to have what you consider to be freedom of speech or lack of control by the powers that be or whatever, you're going to have to increase your skill level a bit on computers. You have to. You don't have a choice. There's no way to make this stuff easier. That's not how this works. It has to be difficult by design, because to do security as well as, distributed technologies, decentralized technologies and all that, it's hard. It's meant to be hard. That's what makes them hardened against authority. But whatever, I've been saying that for 10 years, and I don't know, I guess now people are kind of listening, but they're really not, because look, these people are prima donnas, and they're not going to get the lavish praise or the dopamine hits on Mastodon that they get on Twitter. So they'll be back to Twitter. And if it was about, I want intelligent conversations, they would be on Telegram, or they would be on, some like creating groups on something like Threema. If that's what it was about. That's not what it's about. These people just want to transmit. They don't want to actually have fucking conversations. Or maybe they would be talking about Discord. I mean, interestingly, and I really do find this interesting, there are even calls now, and I'm not saying from Jack Dorsey, there are even calls now that, maybe we should go back to IRC. Maybe IRC should come back. Which, let's be clear, Discord is effectively, it's IRC simplified. And, with some, fancy emoji reacts and everything else. I mean, yes, there's a lot more that Discord can do, I know. But effectively, Discord is just IRC. Like, Discord, I think, is what a lot of, that's the direction people should go. But then on Discord, you're really not going to get advertisers and all that, because it's all like different groups, which is actually much like Mastodon is, but I guess people find Mastodon a little more palatable because it seems at face value more like Twitter, even though it's not. And so that's why they're not going to Discord. But I was blown away to hear, anytime someone besides me says use IRC, I mean, like my ears are just, whoa, they're red hot. I get excited when I hear that. So who knows? In fact, okay, you want one comment on how I feel about Elno with, buying Twitter? If this, like the buying of Twitter, along with the mass layoffs happening at Meta and so on, if this leads to like some kind of grand reversion to where people are going back to IRC and hell, maybe even giving encrypted email a shot here, like with Proton Mail or something. Bravo. let it all burn. Let it all burn. Okay. Just let it fall. And I will be a happy man. I mean, like, you got to understand the smile that comes across my face every time in the morning when I log into IRC. I mean, it is ear to ear, because it's like, aha, no dum-dums, no advertisers, no bullshit. It is a wonderful thing. And oh man, I mean, no noise, like the colors. I choose the colors, baby. There's no reds to tell me that, you got a notification. There's none of that. I choose the color. I call the shots. That's how I want it. IRC, baby. Whew. We'll be right back with some more Sovryn Tech. Have you had enough of the big-name web hosting services that are long on promises but short on bleeding-edge features, uptime, and customer service? Or are you just looking for a performance boost for your business's online presence? The answer is Agorist Hosting. Agorist Hosting is the agile web host that offers full concierge service from website redesign, full e-commerce solutions, even custom apps for your Shopify store, and more. All with security, reliability, redundancy, and privacy at the forefront. Oh, and those bleeding edge features? How about hosting your data in a decentralized system like IPFS, the Interplanetary File System? Good luck getting that from those other guys. Agorist Hosting is ready to take your web presence into the future. Head over to agoristhosting.com to get started. That's AGORIST hosting.com. agoristhosting.com.
Story of the week.
Here's a subject that I don't talk about much lately, anyway. I am going to indirectly be talking about cryptocurrency, about money in general. Certainly, I would love to have a more abstract conversation around money itself. Not that it would necessarily be anything new. I've talked about it many times. But this story I thought was rather enlightening in the direction that things are going. So I want to read a story here from the block by Inbar Prius. And she had a very interesting piece about what is, outside of America, in America, the conversation around CBDCs, which just means central bank digital currency, which is essentially a government version of Bitcoin, a government cryptocurrency. It's not decentralized at all. Okay. Central's in the name. But, this is something that a lot of governments are exploring. Some are further ahead than others. Of course, the European Union, the EU, has been exploring this since 2021, and it's an exploration that's on a timeline, which will be ending in September of 2023. Now, I'll read the piece here from November 7th, so this is super fresh. And here's the headline. Digital euro may have transaction limits and store of value caps. Now, frankly, the headline says it all. Okay, but let me read a little bit more, and then I want to break this down and what this means as far as money, cryptocurrencies, and all of that. So here we go. The European Union's central bank digital currency, CBDC, may have a transaction and store of value limits for individuals. Fabio Panetta, an executive board member of the European Central Bank, the ECB, suggested at the quote towards a legislative framework enabling a digital euro, end quote, conference hosted by the European Commission. Boy, that sounds like that's just a dynamite. Sounds like a dynamite conference. Very exciting. I hope there's orgies or something. I don't know, because I think I'd be tearing out whatever possible hair that I don't have is left. Anyway, exact limits are not set in stone, as the digital euro project is still in an investigation phase within the ECB, but Panetta mentioned 3,000 euros as an example store value limit and 1,000 transactions as a monthly limit. Quote, if we give access to a means of payment which is relatively limited, there are no transaction costs because you only need to have a smartphone, end quote, Panetta said, explaining, quote, there will be risks that people could use this possibility to move, for example, their deposits of other banks or their money out of financial intermediates, end quote. This would be a threat to financial stability in times of crisis, he added, which is why the ECB is looking to introduce transaction limits for the potential CBDC. Quote, digital euro would be an additional option for retail payment, not a challenge to the function of the financial system, end quote, Panetta said, highlighting that the CBDC is not meant to replace cash. Continuing on, Panetta also pointed toward a 50 euro cap on transactions, citing anti-money laundering provisions. However, Christian Lindner, the German Minister of Finance, expressed concerns. Quote, I wonder whether people would accept 50 euros, as they can pay in cash hundreds more. End quote. He added, saying, quote, we should introduce a digital euro that is really accepted by people and not only by policymakers, end quote. The ECB is expected to decide whether to move forward with a realization phase by September 2023, with a legislative proposal expected from the European Commission. The continuation of the European CBDC project is becoming more likely. So effectively, the EU is serious about this, about doing the CBDC. Not a surprise by any stretch, and certainly not a surprise when you consider what they're going to put in place. Effectively, they're going to say, well, you can actually, with the digital euro, you can only have up to, 3,000 euros in this case instead of dollars. You can only have up to 3,000 euros, and you can only do 1,000 transactions. Now, I'm sure that doing 1,000 transactions, they would probably do some kind of environmental claim around that, even though I cannot imagine that a CBDC would operate on a proof of work, infrastructure like Bitcoin does. Because, you talk about something that would flip people out, So... But I'm amazed that the German Minister of Finance comes out with the voice of some kind of reason, keyword of reason, saying we should introduce a digital euro that is really accepted by people and not only by policymakers. So basically, make a technology that people actually want and not something that appeases, the powers that be. Well, yeah, great. But that hasn't been the modus operandi, certainly within technology, within the tech world itself, to say nothing of, the economy and finance. When has that ever been, the order of the day? Like, Bitcoin did not come out of any government, right? That came out because people knew they needed that. They needed something like Bitcoin to exist. And so a person brought it to life. That's kind of what the German, Minister of Finance is arguing for here. Now, there is the realm of fact of what we know, what was said. Now let's get into the realm of speculation. Where do I think that this is going to go? This is a nightmare. This is an absolute economic horror story. Okay? Because what they're talking about is essentially being able to force you into poverty, into permanent poverty. You cannot own more than $3,000 unless what? You fit into some kind of specific, job description, or if you fit into your, if you suck the right dick, or I don't know, whatever it is that will allow you to get a greater cap. That's where this is going. I mean, CBDCs in general should be absolutely terrifying. Like, there's a part of me that the reason why, I mean, you can't shut Bitcoin down anyway, no matter what you do, just like you can't shut down the Pirate Bay, right? I mean, what did they try to, what did the FBI try to do last week? Shut down Z Library? Okay, great. You killed the DNS, but then you could still get there via Tor. Too bad, assholes. This is the beauty of these technologies that had been developed before government knew what to do with them. So, but I wonder if the reason that governments have been so, and I would argue that they have been overall, by comparison to other technologies, they have been incredibly lax, and have kept things vague and confusing as far as regulatory frameworks, or at least some countries have, because they want to see where this experiment can go, and then what can they do? How can they take advantage of this technology that clearly people have found a use case for? And not just people, but also, say, the CIA and others who I firmly believe are behind Bitcoin. Or they're not, okay, whoa. They're not behind Bitcoin. I mean, they are supportive of Bitcoin. They did not create Bitcoin. That didn't happen. I want to be clear on that statement. Someone's going to take that out of context, but whatever, we'll run with it. They are supportive of Bitcoin. Why? Because they use it. It's just as benefit. It's like the Signal messaging app. They use it as much as anybody else does. Hell, even the EU. The EU's like, yeah, all politicians should use Signal. Anyway, so yeah, this is a nightmare. Now you could say, well, but what was the Panetta came right out and said, yeah, but this isn't going to replace cash. No, it's not going to replace, speculation, but it's not going to replace cash yet. But you get people used to the convenience of this. And people will do that. When you make something so fucking convenient, like digital payments, and look, they are convenient. There's a reason that Apple Wallet and, Google Pay and whatever else, or like Apple Pay and Google Pay, all that. There's a reason that that these services have taken off fairly quickly and fairly well, especially in cities, because they are fucking convenient. Even I can admit to that. That doesn't mean that it's okay, right? Because, it's bad enough that credit card companies, and banks, you talk, I mean, you think Google and Apple and Amazon and pick your tech giant are tracking you. Holy shit. Credit card companies know way more about everything that you do than any other company out there. Way more. Why do you think they're not sweating about anything? You don't hear about credit card companies necessarily. I mean, eventually, sure, you can have a Lehman Brothers situation, but I mean, you don't really hear much about those kinds of institutions saying, oh yeah, we had a bad quarter, and all that, like a lot of the tech giants are right now. I mean, because again, like they've got all the data in the world that they can sell off to whoever. They got a whole side business going on with that. Anyway, it's bad enough that credit card companies know every fucking thing that you do, especially when you install their app on your smartphone. But when you end up using, Google Pay, and Apple Pay, and all that, when you end up using that, then you're just doubling how much that data is getting out there. Now you're giving it not only to the card company that you originally had it with, or the bank, but also to the tech giants, when you could have cut that middleman out if you didn't use that shit. But I get it. It's fucking convenient. I understand. Wholeheartedly, I understand. But there's a price that comes with this. And my concern is, like, most people don't think about it. When they sign up for Google Pay or Apple Pay or whatever, when they sign up for that, they don't think about the fact that, holy shit, I am giving all of this financial data, to the tech giants. Hell, they don't even think about the fact that, wait a minute, when I use a credit card all the time, I'm being followed. They don't think about this. And so that's the problem, is you introduce something with the convenience and ease of, say, a CBDC, a digital euro, which, do I believe that politicians can pull off convenience and ease on that? No, not really. But let's say that they do. Give it 10 years. I don't even think you have to wait a generation. Give it 10 years. And people will just I think people or certainly the up and coming generation, they'll just slump right into it. And they'll just get used to that as a standard and then give it just a little bit longer. And they'll be like, yeah, no, I don't need cash. I don't need a bank. I mean, how many people even have cash right now anyway? You're essentially almost already there to this dream, or should I say nightmare, but dream for the authoritarians of being able to cap how much money you can even save and how much you can spend. This is terrifying. Like, even as something something as an ancillary to cash. This is a horrible idea. Who would buy into this? Well, again, make it convenient enough. And certainly, I mean, it does lend itself to somewhat of a conversation. And this is one of my big issues. Okay. Part of the point that I'm making here is that this is the direction that some of these technologies can go. Now, do I think that Bitcoin is ever going to go this direction? No. In fact, I think Bitcoin is always going to exist. Why? Because if you enforce this kind of shit on a populace, and instead of it just, again, it's not just ancillary, it becomes the de facto standard. Okay? It becomes the only way that you can spend money. Mark of the Beast is your smartphone. Woo. Oh. Anyway, okay. But, how are the wealthy going to transact? They'll use Bitcoin. So, I don't think, I'm not saying that all cryptocurrencies and that cryptocurrency inherently can become this, but government wants it to become this. But like I said, there's always going to be Bitcoin. There's always going to be alternatives out there that, the rich, the CIA, but I repeat myself, and other, they need those things to exist to do the shady shit they do. Right? So this is only to keep the peons in line. Now, the point I was going to bring up, and this is something that I've railed against in the crypto space, for years. And that is the idea that, we have to get there are millions of people, including, refugees and migrants to, say, Europe, or other places who, hey, they are getting out of ugly situations. Notice, I am calling them refugees and migrants. I am not calling them any kind of derogatory name because they're human beings. They have the same dignity that you or I do. Okay? However, you have opportunistic asshats who would want to take advantage of this new populace and, basically get them into this program. And then they consider it. They're like, holy shit, wow, yes, I'm in this land of plenty and whatever else. Okay. But then there's these limitations on them, and that's my concern, because these asshats who want to take advantage, we got to give them IDs. We got to get them banked somehow and all this. And hey, a CBDC would be an easy way to do that. And all they have to do is have a smartphone, so you get to track these people wherever they are. And that also becomes their, identification and everything. None of which is under the control of the individual. It's completely under the control of the EU. Again, this is a nightmare. This whole concept. Because you could say, again, it's just it'll complement cash. It's not going to replace it. Yeah, sure. It'll do that now. But what about 10 years from now? What about 20 years from now? It's the old slow frog boil that I'm very concerned about. If you wanted this thing to actually take off, again, you would go with what, the finance minister of Germany said, make something that's actually useful for the people, not the policymakers. That's not what's going on here. And this definitely feels like a long-term plan. They've already been working on it for 2 years. They've got all the patience in the world. They'll ride out all the fucking recessions that are going on and everything. They're not in any trouble. It's the peons that are going to have the problem. And then they come out with this solution, and hey, all they got to do, is offer them some free digital euro. And how many people will sign up for that shit? And then you're locked in. Give it a few years, and, is it the slippery slope? Oh yeah, slippery slope. It's more like a cliff. I don't even think it'd be a slippery slope. Do not. Here, let me rephrase it. do everything you can to subvert and keep from being a part of any CBDC system, any. Because it's going to go this direction. I mean, the fact that they're just being open about it. They, oh yeah, great, CBDC, we get to put limits on people. You know that's the end game. I'll be back with more Sovereign Tech.
Science, outer space, psychology, book and movie recommendations, fiction from the Sovereign universe, travels to points of mystery and the unexplained, and even spirituality? All of that can only mean one thing. The Sovereign Technica Newsletter! By me, Ellen Sovryn, along with some stuff by that crazy man I call my husband, Dr. Brian Sovryn. It's the latest tool in your self-directed education. The education that really matters. If you want to cut through the crap of mainstream media ass clowns, sign up for the Sovereign Technica newsletter right now at sovryn.substack.com. That's sovryn.substack.com. The Sovereign Technica newsletter. Welcome to the future.
Listener's choice.
Ooh, from the war on cash to the war on entertainment. Look, before we get into the war on entertainment, and boy, does it feel like one sometimes. I want to get, okay, let me be clear here. Like, because sometimes, over the years, I mean, when you've been doing this, podcasts like this for as long as I have, look, my opinions have more or less stayed the same. Still incredible. Like, nothing I was just talking about was a knock on cryptocurrency as an abstract concept. I still think there's incredible value in that. I don't think Bitcoin is going anywhere. I am still very supportive of Litecoin, even Zcash, Monero. I mean, like there are, and it's few. Like, I mean, when I say handful, I mean that quite literally. Well, how literal is that with cryptocurrencies that you can't hold in your hand? But you get what I mean. I guess I should say I can count them on one hand. How about that, by handful? With one hand's fingers. How many cryptocurrencies I actually give a shit about and that I think are worthwhile to exist. Yeah, 5? Yeah, it probably tops out at 5. So my opinions haven't changed there at all. But also, in fact, there's even an episode of Sovereign Tech, probably from about 6 years ago, called The War on Cash, where I gave the same advice that I just did, meaning that as government implements cryptocurrencies, whether it's at the time the term CBDC didn't exist, however they decided to do it, like, just stay away from it, because it eliminates, the one of the elements that, I mean, it's not in classical definitions of what money should be, about fungibility and all that. But anonymity should absolutely be a part of the definition of money. And if it's not, I would argue it's not useful, even as a medium of exchange, if it is not in and of itself anonymous. So anyway, let's get into all that said, and the ID stuff. I mean, I've told you that a million times over. ID is for fucking cattle. And that's exactly what the European Union is trying to make everyone, again, neo-feudal lords. So, why don't we get into the feudal lords of entertainment here? I know that might sound extreme, but this story got sent in to me, and this is just unfucking believable. Like, I couldn't believe what I read. And it's from 2 days ago. So what would that have been? November 5th? It's from November 5th, 2022, talking about a movie that, it's been a while since I've seen a new film in theaters that really got me jazzed up. Jazzed up to the point that there's a new, action figure sitting on my desk. And this is a movie of that ilk. That being none other than Black Adam. Did a full review of the film in the recent episode, actually titled Triple Black Adam. I can't wait to watch this movie a few times over, because I'm sure there's just more and more to grok and to glean as far as Easter eggs every time I do watch it. And, I talked about this on a Wednesday Q&A for Sovereign Tech patrons. Of course, go to patreon.com/sovereigntech to get your hook up there. But when I did my review of the movie, I'd actually said, it's like, the score I didn't really notice it, but maybe I was taking in too much at the time. I don't know. But I had mentioned on the Wednesday Q&A that I did finally give Lauren Balfe's score, a really deep listen. And man, the music in this movie, it just takes that movie to a whole other level. The music's phenomenal. Black Adam's theme is amazing. Has a real, and I could imagine The Rock, was asking for this. It kind of opens up. It's sort of it's like the other side of the coin to, say, Hans Zimmer's or John Williams, themes for Superman, and which I think is pretty fitting. But anyway, yeah, so just another reason to love this movie. However, not everybody loves this movie. In fact, there is a stark difference when you go to, say Metacritic, or a lot of the varying sites that rank films. Basically, you have a 40% critic score, so that's not favorable. And then you have a 90% audience score, audience approval rating, which is through the roof. Very few things, even for audiences, kiss that level of 90%. And since Black Adam's release, it has essentially been the number one movie in the world, week after week. I think this would be the third weekend straight that it has achieved that, which is amazing. I had said when I initially reviewed the movie, and believe me, we got something very interesting to get in here that totally fits in with what we talk about on Sovereign Tech. So I'm not just going to re-review the film here or anything, but just an update from what I was saying when I did do a review of the film on Sovereign Tech. This movie's doing money, Warner Brothers has got to be pretty happy about what's going on. It might have seemed like a slower weekend for it on the first weekend, and we talked about that, but it hasn't slowed down at all. If anything, it's picked up. Now, going into next weekend, as in this weekend coming up, it's probably not going to be number one. Why? Because the new Black Panther movie is opening up, which, despite people often thinking that I just hate all Marvel films, that's not true. I actually, Black Panther was, to my mind, the last great Marvel movie that I saw, and, one of the last great movies that I saw. And really, it is a great film. So I am very excited for the sequel here, and we'll definitely be reviewing it on Sovereign Tech. But anyway, that movie's going to do just stupid numbers, and rightfully so, for many reasons, some of which go beyond entertainment. And we're going to go beyond entertainment here when talking about Black Adam with the story from CBR.com. But, I just want to say that, I could see Black Adam still doing number 2 underneath Black Panther, but that's about the only a movie of that caliber with that kind of cachet, the Black Panther, it's only had one movie out, but again, there's things that go beyond the entertainment industry as to why this is such a big deal. It's got, well-deserved cachet that is going to put it over the top. That's just how it's going to happen. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a knock on Black Adam. It's just, this is a phenomenon. I was going to say anomaly, but it's not an anomaly. There's good reasons for this, and it's a phenomenon. So anyway, I've really appreciated, I'll say this before we get into the story, I've appreciated The Rock's constant promotion. He did not just let this movie drop and walk away from it. He is still promoting it. And he has come out and even said, and I can believe him, he's even said, in whatever social media that he does it on, that, he's a total DC boy, as in DC Comics. He bleeds that through and through. And not I could totally relate to what he was saying. I'm like, yeah, exactly. You know, and he was saying Superman is his favorite, you know, but then he gravitated toward the character of Black Adam because he was brown and all this. And I mean, just all fantastic, all the right things to say. And again, I can really believe The Rock. You can tell, especially if you've been following his career in wrestling and otherwise, as long as I have. I mean, the guy, you know, guy's jacked as fuck, but he's a total dork. And yeah, anyway, I could see it. So so that was cool, you know, for someone to like, I mean, that's the thing with The Rock. He's very self-aware. Self-aware in the sense that like he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing is cheesy. He knows what makes these things work. And he also has enough stroke, enough pull to make things how he wants them. And I think we all really benefit from that. Anyway, so here we go from CBR.com, which, you know, it's always impressive for a website to have a 3-character.com address. And this is certainly one of the geek sites that's been around for a good long while, but they're also one of the worst as far as their, you know, clickbait. And frankly, their stories are nonsense, and this one really is no different. So coming from Ronaldo Matadine, let's see, here's the headline. Black Adam's fan reception is problematic for the DCU's future. With critics panning Black Adam, but audiences adoring the film, Warner Brothers could be duped into thinking it's the formula to move forward. All right, stop right there. Okay. Like, I just want, that's the subheader. I want to read that subheader again, and we're going to read some of the story. But, like, let me read the subheader. With critics panning Black Adam, but audiences adoring the film. Okay, so critics hate it. We talked about the CineScores. 40% versus 90%. So critics, 40%. They hate it. Audiences, 90%. They love it. Okay, CBR.com. Ronaldo Matadine is admitting audiences adore the film. What's the concern here? That, exact quote, Warner Brothers could be duped into thinking it's a formula to move forward. Wait. Who are you trying to please here? Like, this is so ass backwards. Wait, so do you make a movie to please the critics, or do you make a movie to get people to buy tickets to go see it, get asses in seats? Which is it? According to CBR, it looks like it's you just appease the elite ass critics and fuck the audience. I mean, honestly, it's what it feels like Hollywood does every day today anyway. Let's read on. This is that really what CBR.com here is saying? Here we go. When the critics began revealing their takes on Black Adam, many wondered if DC had churned out another bomb. It would have been disappointing given DC fans and comic book movie fans in general want to see heroes such as Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and the rest of the Justice League doing well on the big screen. It's not just about having a competitor for Marvel, but giving fans, old and new, the joy of witnessing some of pop culture's most iconic faces fighting their villains in cinematic grandeur. It paints an interesting dichotomy, however, with Rotten Tomatoes' critical score at 39%, but the audience's at 90%, indicating fans love Dwayne Johnson's anti-hero. However, while the movie's success is great, viewers receiving the film so well isn't good for the DC universe moving forward long term. Stallion breaking in. I can't believe I'm reading that. Like, you're literally saying people don't know what they want. Like, this ass backwards doesn't even begin to cover just how. What is this? This is like Bizarro Land. Pun intended. You don't want Warner Brothers to, like, make movies that people want to see? Does that make sense? Let me read on. Maybe there's going to be more clarity here somewhere. Let me read on. So here, byline, Black Adam's praise is fans accepting mediocrity? What? Okay, let's read. With Shazam and Aquaman coming off as more inspirational, lighthearted movies, and the violent side of the DCU being tended to via Peacemaker and Amanda Waller's Task Force X. Make no mistake, Black Adam's violence does have a place. It's the very nature of the character, unlike what transpired in Man of Steel. But let's stop on that. Calm down on this. This is a jab at Zack Snyder, which critics love to do. This is a jab at Zack Snyder for making Superman kill somebody in Man of Steel, when, Superman doesn't do that. Okay. Now, while I agree that moment should have been saved for Wonder Woman in the overall shit show that was Wonder Woman 1984, which a movie brought to you by the U.S. military, by the way. That's not an exaggeration. Look it up. And that's fucking weird. Anyway, so, I mean, this is what the military needs to just stay out of fucking movies, but anyway, or at least out of, no, just get out of everything. Okay, there we go. Okay, moving on. I've explained that, it worked. It was a powerful moment. Okay, I wish they would have saved it elsewhere, but it's a powerful moment. Stop ripping on Zack Snyder over that. Okay, moving on. I mean, we could talk about it more, but I'd have to get into a whole history of Superman. There's so much that we'd have to talk about. But DC Comics writers who had been writing Superman for years pulled similar tricks. And anyway, Snyder knew what he was doing. Let's move on. But while Adam himself, as in Black Adam, is on brand, that doesn't mean a charismatic lead should give him a hall pass. Yes, fans love Johnson and his WWE time as The Rock, but still the outpouring of love can backfire due to the movie's many flaws. Now, fans are entitled to their own opinions, but Black Adam isn't that good of a film. The plot is rushed, the dialogue is lacking, and it relies heavily on the typical CGI-laced finale that flopped for Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, and Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, to name a few. Okay, Stallion breaking in. No, I don't think that failed on any of those films. Wonder Woman is a phenomenal comic book film, the original one, or, the first one with Gal. Batman v Superman, far better as the Ultimate Edition. It solves a ton of its problems, okay? Suicide Squad is what it is. And I'm not sure what they didn't put the there, so I'm guessing they're not talking about James Gunn's film. But Suicide Squad, I mean, that ran into other issues, like CGI lace finale wasn't one of them. In fact, it really wasn't there. Anyway, that's a whole other conversation. But the plot is rushed. The dialogue is lacking. I mean, look, that's comic books, folks. Like, it's meant to be. Comic books are different from novels in that they are half visual spectacle, including what would kind of require a CGI-laced finale. So this kind of proves my point that the critics don't understand comic books, and they don't like the idea of comic books being translated directly onto the screen. They want it. This is such a problem because, look, the beauty of comic books is that comic books, believe it or not, can actually reflect, have the opportunity to reflect real life more. What do I mean by that? So you have a narrative structure, right? That is the classic, setup, conflict, climax. That has existed, it's Greco-Roman shit, right? Here's the problem with that. While I certainly love tons and tons and tons of stories, from Star Trek to Stargate to Battlestar, the original Battlestar Galactica, thank you. I mean, just about everything, and so many books that follow that narrative style, right? Setup, conflict, climax, conclusion, all that follow that, nice, wrap it up in a bow. Life doesn't work that way. And I think one of the powers of comic books is that it actually doesn't always have to follow that narrative, partly because there is no set. You can see, when you're making comic books, you can have a storyline that, all right, you planned for it to go 3 issues, and then you're like, what, fuck it, I want to go 6. And if you got a great team and a hot selling comic, you can do that. You can call that shot with the top brass at DC or Marvel or Dark Horse or IDW or whoever. Unless it's a set miniseries and you know how many you're going to get, then that's a different story. But, you know, if you have a run going, you know, a volume run going on a comic, you can kind of pull that off. And there's a lot of times where comics have completely fucked with all forms of narrative structure that we understand good storytelling to be. For example, the classic issue of G.I. Joe with Snake Eyes, where not a word is spoken. Panel by panel, the action is completely visual. It's amazing. It's like a silent film. Now, most people today would say, don't you dare ever make a silent film. It doesn't work anymore. It was only a technological, problem. Like, it was a limitation. It was a technological limitation that we did silent films. You don't need to do that anymore. But yet that issue of G.I. Joe is considered one of the greatest comic books in history. We can buck narrative trends with comic books. And if that can be translated to comic book movies, phenomenal. Great. Okay. So I have like when I write short stories, I've had some people tell me that my short stories come off kind of weird because they leave a lot of things like hanging. And that's not because there isn't conclusion. It's because it's like real life. In real life, shit hangs sometimes. You don't know what happened to that person after you had that awkward conversation. You don't know what, and you go the rest of your life with that. Now, if the writer or, narrative controller, the creator, is setting up to where you're supposed to get an answer and you don't, that's a different story. That's bad writing. But if you're just trying to like have something in there that is just going to hang for all time, no, like you're bucking narrative trends, Greco-Roman narrative trends. And I think that that's great. So anyway, let's move on. Here we go. In that sense, it has a lot of the same technical and narrative errors from the older movies. Again, no, it doesn't. Which the DCU has been trying to move away from. But should Warner Brothers gauge this reception as an acceptable standard, all the progress could be walked back. And it says, here's the next byline or subheader. Warner Brothers can't go back to the early Snyder era. Why not? In the Zack Snyder era, the film verse was wobbly, which is why mediocre content thereafter was heralded as a setup. Even Wonder Woman 1984 is viewed as palatable, despite all its mistakes and creepy Steve Trevor resurrection arc, because what came before was so bad. No, I don't agree with you at all. What came before was fucking amazing. Wonder Woman 1984 is bad. Who the hell's... Well, I know who's writing this, but what the fuck is with these people? Moving on. But now, with Black Adam being seen as a moneymaker, DC movies with weird plot holes, Hawkman not asking for Adam's help against Sabbac, odd characterizations, Waller not killing a human Adam, and motivations, as seen with the randomly existing intergang, and that need to stick in a ton of fights, style over substance, may become the norm again. Oh, for fuck's sake. No, comic books are all about style over substance. See, I'm telling you, this is because movie critics, they critique movies. They don't understand what happens if you directly translate something. And I am so fucking sick of people supposed fans who have bought into this dumbass, elitist, critics, movie studio, bullshit narrative that, well, some things don't translate well to film. But then it's like, again, my answer is always the same. Don't make the movie if it doesn't translate well to film. Don't fucking bother. It's okay if you want to change things up. It's all right if you want to do, your little spin and your little interpretation, but then we don't have to like it. Here's the deal, though. With Black Adam, as I've argued from the beginning, this is a movie that just took the comic book format of an actual comic book and put it on celluloid. That's what they did. You don't like that? You don't have to like that. But you also don't have to go and tell Warner Brothers, oh, no, fuck, no, don't do that. You got to give us our proper narrative structure. We need our SVO patterns in our sentences and what? Reading on. Given how often Black Adam has those slow-mo shots as well, it'll feel like going back to the early Snyder era. Oh, fucking A. This is what I was saying. Remember my review? I said this was a movie. In fact, specifically the slow motion shot when Black Adam first appears and like, you know, all those tanks are shooting things and he's just moving in slow motion and like dodging bullets and all this shit. Like this, it's showing that he's a god. And that's what Zack Snyder understood that the rest of fucking Hollywood is too goddamn idiotic and moronic to understand. That DC Comics, you know, these characters were getting set up as, ironically, as much as they could buck Greco-Roman storytelling structure, they are being set up as Greek gods. Like eventually that's what like Kirby and a whole bunch of other, you know, we're really going for here. I mean, we got to the point where we did comics called New Gods. It's the point. Fuck. I'm sorry that you're such a depressed goddamn human being and you cannot deal with characters on screen that, you know, don't have fucking flaws. I like seeing aspirational characters on the screen. But anyway, let's keep going. That's not to say Snyder can't return and churn out something after recognizing his mistakes. Holy shit. What mistakes? That's a matter of opinion. As well as Joss Whedon's from Justice League. But right now, Black Adam is just papering cracks, bandaging old wounds, and applying a hopeful, creative treatment rather than being an assured, decisive cure. Winging it like this shouldn't be a template for success, nor a measuring stick the studio goes by, which may well become the case the more the box office haul grows. If so, the DCU could end up with a universe on par with Venom, or even the old Transformers movies. Weak stories that look good, which do run the risk of botching something Marvel Studios has nailed. Longevity and sustained creative success, even with its not-so impressive properties. Rivalries and comparisons aside, fans all want the DCU to win, but Black Adam can lull Warner Brothers into a false sense of security due to the market. The thirst for anything DC and, admittedly, Marvel saturation, coupled with an audience that's trying to move away from COVID-19 and back into theaters, will result in folks flocking to a popcorn movie that's steeped in senseless violence and laughs, but ultimately it's not the formula for a compelling, nuanced superhero verse. Lost for words. Who is this person that's just like, oh, you know, like, I mean, it'd be one thing if he wrote this and, you know, this, like the CineScore, whatever, was, you know, 40% and the critic score was 40%. Even though what do those numbers truly mean? Not much, but, or take them for what they are. Okay. A little bit of a grain of salt on those. It'd be one thing if it was that, in that, but somehow it was still making money, right? Like then this argument would hold some water. But no, we have a lot of evidence online, at least, and we have the ticket sales to back them up, to back up, you know, those comments that people love this movie, including myself. And yet, you know, so okay, so you got people that genuinely like it. That's why they're spending money on it. And yet you got this asshat, you know, at CBR.com saying, oh, but Warner Brothers, just because people love this movie, don't think this is how you should make movies. What? Again, who do movies get made for? Are the movies just supposed to get made for you know, this slap nuts here? Or is it supposed to get made for people to watch and enjoy? I thought it was the latter. I don't know. A hot take that movies are made for people to watch and enjoy. But fuck. I guess according to movie critics, we're wrong. No, the gatekeepers, they're the gatekeepers. It's so funny because these fucking critics are the people who call people like me or who call other people who demand, you know, like some fealty with what gets made, you know, as in, okay, yeah, fine. You can make a movie about our favorite character, you know, our favorite characters or whatever, about our comic book heroes or villains, but we want you to pay some fealty to what came before. We don't want you to rewrite it to fit your modern sensibilities. Okay. You know, like, and we get called gatekeepers for that. But then, but then this person comes out and says, hey, no, don't listen to the fans, listen to the critics. What the fuck? The world's upside down, man. Like, if you wanted a clearer fucking sign of just how screwed and screwed up the entertainment industry is, here it is. Here it is. You literally have the entertainment industry, or, you know, the news part of the entertainment industry saying, don't listen to, again, this isn't just like a few people, you know, who are complaining about Rise of Skywalker, even though I think there's more than a few people. This isn't just like a few, you know, bad actors, you know, malicious nut jobs who are being preposterously harsh to, and that's putting it mildly, to Kelly Marie Tran, or who are complaining about Rey Skywalker or something. No. You have the ticket sales. You can't argue with those. You got the box office numbers. You can't argue with those. People love this fucking movie. And they're saying as much. And you're telling them that they're wrong. Which is it? You know? Like, people complain, Rise of Skywalker does the money, and people, after they see it, they're like, oh, that fucking sucked. And then you tell them they're wrong, but then they go to see a movie, it does the money, and they love it, and you're like, oh, well, they're fucking wrong. Like, people can't win. The movie-going audience can't fucking win, because it's not about making a movie that people enjoy. It's about making, I don't know, what, is there some kind of, I mean, are you surprised, Hollywood, that people think there's some kind of odd agenda going on here? Or, I mean, it's multiple agendas, obviously, because Warner, you know, CBR is not on Warner Brothers' take, clearly. I don't get it. This is the dumbest thing. What editor? I want to find out the name of the editor. Like, what moron allowed this to get published? Like, did you read it at all? Are you saying, oh, well, this is what gets the clicks. This is what does... No, this is what kills your credibility completely. Man, unbelievable. So exactly what I read at the top, just they added on 800 words, is true. With critics panning Black Adam, but audiences adoring the film, Warner Brothers could be duped into thinking it's the formula to move forward. How dare Warner Brothers? Oh, how dare Warner Brothers try and make a buck? Ooh. Get them out there with the tin can. They're hurting. What the fuck? This is crazy. Don't ever listen to critics. I mean, I'll just tell you how I feel about it. You know, like, I mean, I'm just a fan, just like everybody else, you know, of this shit. I'm not a professional critic. I wouldn't want to be a professional critic. Never. Hot damn. Don't listen to these people. Don't listen to the fucking reviews. Man, I'm baffled. Anyway, that's it. We'll move on from that. I saw the story, got sent in to me, and I was just like, what the hell am I reading? It's Bizarro Land. That's all I can say. We'll be right back with more Sovryn Tech. Whew. Hey, baby, I know. You are tired of Gmail. You have had enough. Well, I have a solution for you. What I want you to do is you go to Fastmail, okay? It's fastmail.sovryntech.com. That's the URL you can use. You're going to get a discount with that. You are going to love this. This is email for email's sake. This company does nothing more. Just email, and they do it right. All the latest security technologies. You want to log into your account with your YubiKey? You can do that. Fastmail has your hookup. Very inexpensive plans. I want you to check it out. You go to fastmail.sovryntech.com. That'll get you the hookup, and it's an honor to have them as a part of Sovryn Tech. Woo! Let's get back to the show.
Shall we play a game?
Well, let us talk about video games, and we are actually going to talk about the game. When I say the game, I mean, you know, the original 86, 87 Super Mario Brothers. The game. Right? I mean, that's the game that literally changed the world. You know, I mean, do I consider it the greatest game ever? No. Would I argue with somebody that says it? No. But it is certainly like the game that everybody and their fucking mother, you know, has played. It's the game. Come to find out, we've been playing this damn thing all wrong. I couldn't believe this. I saw this, and I don't know how I never heard of this. I don't know how it never got published in Nintendo Power, and it didn't, because I read later issues, like when you get into the N64 era, I didn't read every issue, but for a long time, I mean, and we're talking on the order of probably almost 10 years, I read basically every issue of Nintendo Power cover to cover. I mean, I was that dork sitting in high school even, in the late 90s, reading Nintendo Power still. And damn right. I mean, you got some pretty kick-ass comics in it at that point. But anyway, so this, as far as I know, has never been announced anywhere until effectively now. And story coming from Lifehacker. Link is in the show notes. Here's the thing. So one of the reasons that this game is the game is because everybody can kind of play it. Now, granted, Shigeru Miyamoto, like his game design is brilliant. The simplicity was phenomenal, right? But part of the reason like everybody knows this game and plays it so quickly, not just because of the intuitiveness of the controls, but the fact that, so when you start off with what, 3 guys, three lives, and you can obviously get more or whatever, but to get to level 8, most people played the original Super Mario Brothers by, you go through it linearly. Maybe when you get to World 2, you'll end up, you'll use a warp zone, right? Or should I say when you get to 1-2, you'll use a warp zone. Not World 2, but World 1, Level 2. And then as you go on, you'll find other warp zones and you can skip ahead to whatever. And usually if you wanted to skip ahead and play certain levels, that's often what we do, unless we connected a Game Genie or something, right? But come to find out that, because the thing was, if you got to, say, level 7, or you got to World 7, level 2, so you got to 7-2 on Mario Brothers, and you died, you lost all your lives, you would start from World 1, level 1. You would start from 1-1 and have to work your way all the way back. Now, I mean, I did this. Everybody I know did this. And it's, again, part of the reason everybody knows this game so well is because you had to play through it so many times just to try to get to the end, to try to get to the last level and, save the princess. Well, come to find out, let's say you're on World 7-1. You could die, lose all your lives, wait for the title screen to show back up, and here's the rub. If you held down the A button and then press start at the title screen, it would take you, as long as you didn't reset the cartridge, it would take you back to the world that you were last on. Now, if you died on 7-2, it would take you back to 7-1, but it would still take you back to World 7. Holy shit. I mean, the less amount of time people would have played this game would be astronomical if we knew this, right? Because that's the thing. You kept having to fight your way, or, bounce your way back, run your way back to level 7, level 8 over and over and over again when you lost all your lives. But you could have just hit A and start from the title screen and gone right back, at least to that world. Fuck. This is insane. God damn it. I mean, I'm surprised Nintendo didn't tell anybody, I mean, they couldn't have had the foresight to know that people would be that into this game. But wow, to not find that out until over 30 years later. Holy shit. And it's in everything. I tried it on the Switch version. I tried it on even on emulators, varying emulators, by the way. It's just, no matter how you play this, even if you do the Wii console version or virtual console version, which I tried that as well, it works beautifully. Nuts. Just fucking nuts. Anyway, that's it for talking about video games. I don't know if your world has changed, but mine was, and at least now I don't have to play through all those worlds. Anyway, we'll be right back with more Sovryn Tech. Woo!
From Big Finish Productions, Blake 7, The Classic Audio Adventures.
I'm taking Liberator in on manual. We'll be in teleport range in 2 minutes.
What the hell was that?
Information.
Liberator has been attacked.
You don't say.
Put up the force wall.
Confirm.
Message to all ground commanders. Initiate the final phase. Let's crush these rebels once and for all.
My name is Avon. Kerr Avon.
Kerr Avon.
Our hostage arrives, which may be unnecessary.
As a hostage, it's nice to be superfluous.
You can go to Blake7.com to find more of the new adventures of one of science fiction's greatest masterpieces, Blake 7, at Blake7.com.
The Ancient and the Strange.
Speaking of video games, this is something I actually teased in the last episode. Of course, it's time for The Ancient and the Strange, and as I have been doing, I have been reading the relevant pieces that I've written for the spirituality segment of the Sovryn Technica newsletter. Of course, go to sovryn.substack.com to get your hookup on that. And there is a free version, and that free version includes my spirituality segment, which is, as best as I can tell, has been pretty popular. And, you know, I'm honored by that, you know, by the craziness that I lay out in it. It hasn't really turned anybody off yet. But anyway, I had teased this last week that I wanted to talk about, and I think, well, to say that it fits in with any kind of theme in this episode, I wouldn't suggest that, but if there's ever a time to read this one, the time is here. And as we were just talking about video games, well, why don't we talk about video games a little bit more? And this is a piece about spirituality and video games, as in how do video games fit into spirituality? For somebody who is so hardcore, arguably, especially if you've been a patron and you listen to the Wednesday Q&As on both, how do I square that circle? Well, I wrote this piece to do just that. So anyway, I will get right into it. And this is from, I believe, issue 9 of the Sovryn Technica newsletter. Link is in the show notes, of course. Spirituality and video games. Spirituality and video games. There was a brief time where I was a pretty hardcore Christian. Read into that what you will, but I know, it still surprises me to this day. I mention this because I remember asking a youth pastor at the time, who I worked with and discussed video games a lot with, a simple question. So, how do you justify playing video games when the New Testament unequivocally states that as Christians, we are to spread the truth of Christ nonstop? His answer? Well, he did give the disciples time to rest and sleep. While I appreciate his attempt and engagement with such a challenging figure as Dr. Sovryn, I personally, at the time and to this day, think that's a shitty answer. I'm 100% sure that Jesus would have flipped over the D&D board or the Switch faster than the money tables at the temple. There are souls to save, Jesus would say. Who has time for a perverted blue hedgehog? Thou shalt not be a furry is somewhere in 2 Thessalonians, I'm sure. Fortunately, or unfortunately, depending upon your ideological persuasion, I am not a Christian that has to deal with such trying modern matters. No, if a term were to get tacked onto my spirituality, I'm a Kabbalist, and the problem of playing video games isn't a problem at all. In fact, it's practice. What do I mean? Let's get into it, and it doesn't have to take long. Seeing is believing, the old adage goes, and it's a good one. It's a rally cry of the rational, the logical, the scientist, and I stand by it as well, because I consider myself to be all three. But as someone who also supports the non-rational, something far different from irrational, mind you, I equally stand by the phrase, feeling is believing. And this part, the emotional and sensual component, the realm of the sensualist and not the logician, is the part that often gets left out by those who consider themselves the heirs of Greek/Western mental prowess. This is how you end up with a populace that is spiritually bankrupt, separating their spirit, mind, and body from each other as if they were parts you could just pull out in some life-size game of operation. Mind, spirit, body is one thing, not three separate things. And without feeling deeply, you cannot think clearly, and thus cannot, or at least will struggle to, act efficaciously. So what does this have to do with video games? While feeling isn't the entirety of what gives you the ability to act, it is a part of the above mind, spirit, body equation that is the most quashed today with constant attention-stealing media surrounding you, doing its best to keep you from paying attention to the thing that truly matters in your life, you. Anything that enhances and brings to fore feelings for you, especially feelings or sensations that you previously thought impossible, is a wonderful thing. Because if feeling is believing, many of us can't actually do until we feel. Let me give you an example. Exercise. Most people will at some point in their lives think to themselves, I think I'm going to hit the gym and try to get in shape, for whatever reason they may have. 2 weeks later or less, usually they'll stop exercising and write it off as a bad idea right up there with democracy, which, to be clear, is a horrible fucking idea. Why do they stop? Because they were doing it for the wrong reasons? No, let me assure you, there are little to no reasons that are wrong to work out for. Rather, the reason they stopped is they didn't feel the difference quickly enough and long-lasting enough. If they could go a couple of months, the instant that they go to pick up a can of beans or anything, and they feel that it is incredibly lighter than it was 2 months previous, they'll become hooked to that feeling of strength. I guarantee it. That person will become a gym rat for life after experiencing that sensation of personal power. It's addicting in all the beautiful ways, and you know what it's like to actually become more than you were just by putting in the proper effort. This is true for so many other things that we think impossible. They're only impossible because we've never felt or experienced what it is like to do that thing. This is the argument for playing video games, or at least one of them. Video games, more so than movies, TV, or music, give us the opportunity to interact, engage, and experience the art before us. When Mario does some insane leap, when you jump into the cockpit of a starfighter, or even when Tails flies around spinning his tails, our mind, spirit, body registers that as an experience, and an experience becomes a possibility. While video games can certainly become a distraction in their own right from important and or beautiful matters that deserve our attention in this universe, and this is true of all media types, by the way, the ability to imprint into your very being the wild activities that a video game offers can lead to those very activities becoming a part of your future reality. It's not some supernatural law of attraction, thinking it into existence kind of thing. No, it's much simpler than that. It's simply that your body now has a frame of reference for the impossible no longer being so. Your being now has an idea of how to maybe do what you did in that video game, and that's how the once considered impossible becomes a part of our reality. No mysticism required. But if we were to get mystical, well, let's get saucy for a second. Since you've now thrown 1,000,000 fireballs as an Italian plumber, can you suddenly start lobbing your own? Again, it takes more than just feeling it, but I'll certainly be watching out for a burning bush when you're in town. P.S. The real reason to play video games? Because they're fucking fun, man. Game on! And that is from issue 9 of the Sovryn Technica newsletter. Might be some controversial statements in there, I know, but I stand by it. This has always been, it used to be the reason, and this isn't exactly true anymore, but, one of the things, I've said this about entertainment in general, I don't want to watch, if I just want to watch people today, in the modern world doing whatever, then, I'll go sit on the front porch, right? When I sit down to watch a movie, play a video game, or whatever I'm doing, a TV show, whatever, or a book, whatever it happens to be, I want something that seems impossible today, to do right now, or is impossible. There are things that I would argue, don't confuse me with what I was saying there. I do think there are things that are impossible, okay? But that said, that might be a very short list. But that's the thing. Like, I always wanted to watch something that was inspirational, or take in something that was inspirational, or as I mentioned earlier when we were talking about Black Adam, perhaps, or like movies of that type, something that was more aspirational. And for a long time, my tastes in video games, were very much about like the things that I couldn't do anywhere else. And the argument would be, it's like, well, why play, a video game, like a football video game or a motocross video game or something, when you can actually go and do that in real life? And that's a fair argument to bring up at times. No doubt about that. But I've also learned to kind of appreciate video games beyond that. Also, to where like and I've brought this up before, like Madden NFL 2003 and 2005, and even some of the ones from the 90s, or Tecmo Bowl, if you want to go classic. Like, these games are amazing. Not because they're football, but because they are like a simulator of a very specific set of rules. And, you learn to see them in that way. Not only that, but one of the true powers of video games, which, I've made the argument that video games are the greatest art form that mankind has ever devised. Now, why do I say that? Because it takes all the other art forms, puts them together, and not only puts them together, not only mashes them together, movies, music, all of it, but it allows you to take control of the narrative. What made video games so exciting to certain types of people, in the 70s, the 80s, and so on to some degree, even though those kinds of things are changing. But what made them so exciting was that you didn't have to play by the rules. Like, we were talking about Mario earlier. If you wanted to warp to level 6, go ahead. You don't have to play it linearly, even if that's how, Miyamoto-san designed it. If you don't want, if you don't want to collect all the coins, if you don't want to do this, if you don't want to do that, if you want to turn the game into something completely different, if you want to completely change the rules of what, the developer had in mind for the goal of the game, you can do that. You can play the game and do whatever the fuck you want. In fact, a lot of games came out of like just little elements of one game that somebody thought was brilliant, and like, wow, that whole inventory setup thing could be its own game. Like, that happens so often. That's the beauty of video games, is that you get to actually control the narrative flow, which far surpasses movies and basically just about any other art form. Other than, yes, in your own head, you could kind of rewrite what's going on in the movie, but you can do that with video games, and very viscerally, and you can experience it more than it just being in your own head. You actually actively engage in that act. And that's the power of video games. Even video games that simulate real life, arguably, it gives you the chance to fuck with, the narratives that are generally forced upon us. And video games are straight up anarchy, or at least they can be. Many of them are, certainly the classics. So I will leave you with that, and we'll be right back with some more Sovereign Tech. Going to wrap this baby up in the ironically named, for in this case, Climax.
The most incredible television event ever, as you join the crew of Battlestar Galactica.
Right here, you creepy crawly. I have led the entire human race to ruin.
The last of mankind, fighting for life in a hostile galaxy.
Most of us are dead.
Alone, with only one hope, Battlestar Galactica and her crew.
There is no other destination.
Commander Adama, Captain Apollo, the intrepid Starbuck, and the dazzling Athena, searching for a new and peaceful world.
May as well live for today. We might not have many left. Let the attack begin.
A new age of high adventure, Battlestar Galactica.
The Golden Stallion doing whatever he wants to do. The Climax.
Speaking of divisive films, it struck me, actually, this past weekend. So, Ellen and I we've been doing I've been giving her the run through, take that how you will. We've been running through Stargate SG-1. It's Ellen's first time. It's my 6th or 7th, all told. And that includes, all 10 seasons, 5 seasons of Atlantis, the movies, 2 seasons of Universe, and even Stargate Infinity. Yes, I have that, even on DVD. But anyway, we've been going through that, and we haven't really we haven't had the chance to watch a lot of movies like we often do at home, partly because both of our schedules, she being an engineer, me doing what I do, both of our schedules have been absolutely insane. But we ended up having time to catch a movie on Saturday night. And Ellen, in her wisdom, which is vast, she said, "Can we watch a Star Trek movie?" And I'm like, yeah, do you even have to ask? Of course we can, so take your pick, any of them. And I mean that, any of them. And that includes the J.J. Abrams movie and even Galaxy Quest. I'll watch any of them. And she's like, I don't think we've watched Nemesis. And I realized, I don't think she and I had ever watched Star Trek Nemesis together. Now, this was interesting, and I didn't think about it at the time, but it's coming up quickly in December on the 20th anniversary of the release of Star Trek Nemesis. And that's really hard to believe that it's been 20 years. Now, me telling you what we've been watching lately is actually going to have some bearing on what I want to talk about here. This is a movie, Star Trek Nemesis, not like I haven't watched it in a while. I've actually watched it many, 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 many times. This is a movie that admittedly I have been on a bit of a roller coaster on over the past 20 years. I remember when I saw it, it was the last movie that I saw before I went overseas when I was in the military. And I remember walking away feeling oddly disappointed, which was new for me for a Star Trek movie. Like, I'd never felt that before. Not that I'd seen that many Star Trek movies in theaters. I had seen Generations, First Contact, and Insurrection, but, seeing Nemesis, I walked away with a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. I was still hopeful, and, Star Trek Enterprise was still on TV, so it's not like it was the only Star Trek there. But I think what happened was, I wasn't like totally negative on it either, and I was still like reading the books, and the Star Trek Titan books would come out as kind of sequels to it, and those were actually really well done. But, I've reviewed this movie. This might be the most reviewed movie in Sovryn Tech history because I've talked about it multiple times. I talked about it years ago on a Sovryn Tech special. I talked about it also on a Patreon-only episode where I ranked all the Star Trek movies, and this was actually at the bottom of that list of all the Star Trek movies. And I'm sure, I know I reviewed it kind of individually as well, at points. So, and even Rob and I did a TIE Fighter Renegades where we talked about it again when we were ranking the Star Trek movies together. So I have talked about this movie a lot. And honestly, thinking back on it, every time I've reviewed it, I've had a different opinion of the film. And after watching this with Ellen, this most recent time, and with it being the 20th anniversary, I think it's worth, bringing up again. I have a bit of a different take on the movie, and it's a different take because every time I've watched this movie, it seems to fall under a different, context. And now the movie is in the context of two things. One is the shit show that is Star Trek Picard, and even diehard fans who still, for some reason, like Discovery and Lower Decks and all that other crap. I think even they recognize, Star Trek Picard is a horrible show. I think everybody admits the shit's so bad. Anyway, so there's that, which changes the context of this film. And there's also the fact that, Ellen and I haven't watched Star Trek in a really long time. We've been watching SG-1 for a while. Before that, we were watching Battlestar Galactica. We've been going through other shows. And so it was kind of a coming home in watching Nemesis this time around. And I gotta say, like, I walk away from this viewing of the film this time. I love this movie more than I have ever, I think. There's really a lot to appreciate in this movie. It's still flawed. There are still massive problems. And I want to get the problems out of the way, but then I do want to talk about what's really good about this movie. I would still, here's the funny part though, I would still rank this as like the worst Star Trek movie, but it's still Star Trek, so it's still fucking great. But as far as compared to the others, it's at the end of the list. So, problems with this movie. The biggest problem is the entire scene of the raping of, and literal, the raping of Deanna Troi. You know, even though it's done, telepathically, psionically, it's still happening. To say nothing of the fact that it's like a completely unnecessary and out of place scene. And I know why they did it, and I'll talk about why, but it's a completely out of place scene. It's horrible. And I get that it was like kind of setting up. This isn't the only reason that they did this. I'll talk about more of that in a minute. They were setting it up so that you could understand how Troi could later on in the movie basically do like a Ouija board trick on the tactical station on the bridge of the Enterprise E with Worf, which was weird, because she had like that connection with the Riemann Viceroy, played by Ron Perlman, by the way. I think everybody forgets that Ron Perlman and Tom Hardy are in this, and they both do a fantastic job acting-wise. I mean, Ron Perlman's, brilliant. But anyway, so I know they were setting up for that, but the thing is, like, if that's all they were setting up for, it would have been fine. Here's the real problem with this scene. So, like, Troi is getting, psionically raped. And, which, since it's happening in the mind, it might as well, it is real in a telepathic sense. Okay. Because, Shinzon is taking the place of Riker's body and everything. I mean, it's as real as it could be. She goes to sick bay, right? And Dr. Crusher says there's this and this wrong with her, and all that. And she's really shooken up, as she should be. It's rape. And she's like, "Sir, I would like to request, to be taken off duty." She says that to Picard. And Picard says, "Permission denied." And I was like, what? It's not even funny. Like, what? What do you mean? You had a crew member, I don't care how necessary, you had a crew member just get raped and you're telling her she can't go off duty? What the fuck? I mean, it's a total black mark on this movie. Like, it's so bad. Like it really hurts. I mean, it hurts the whole franchise, frankly. But like, I mean, let's be clear here. Everybody calls bull or gives shit to the original series, especially the last episode of the original series, Turnabout Intruder, when, like it said that women are not allowed to reach the rank of captain. That's bad. I make no excuses for it. That's dumb and it's bad. I think this is 10x worse. Like anybody want like I mean, this hurts the entire like feminist, like pro-feminist argument that people make for the next generation. Like this hurts it really, really bad. I don't know who let that through. Horrible writing. That did not get thought out. And not that, and look, Star Trek has had other moments that are pretty bad. Like, and I've talked about this. There's an episode of Star Trek Voyager where 7 of 9, something kind of similar occurs, kind of a telepathic affair. And like they used it in the advertising to say like over and over again, he violated me. And we thought we were going to watch an episode of Star Trek Voyager where 7 of 9 got raped. Now that in of itself, like, we don't need to see that. Not that doesn't have to be discussed because it's a thing that happens and it's real and it's important to talk about. Okay. But, and that's the thing, like, just don't use this shit as marketing. Okay. Because that's what it is. And look, here's the deal. Like with Star Trek Nemesis, they had the writers, the director, Stuart Baird, which is the other problem that I'm going to talk about in a second. They had the running orders, the marching orders that you need to, or at the very least they had the idea and they were running with it, that we want to make a darker Star Trek. Now at face value, like I don't have a problem with that. Like I thought, that was cool. I remember seeing the trailer, watching it on my iMac when this movie was originally coming out, seeing that and like, wow, this is going to be really different Star Trek. This looks really, really cool, and you're seeing everything with the Argo and all that. And, like that's exciting, right? Like I get that, but this was a direction. I get it that they wanted to make things different, but this is not a way that you had to go. You didn't have to do all these like extremes and differences for Star Trek all at once in one movie. There was no need for that. Okay. I don't mind Star Trek talking about rape, but talk about it and do it in a fucking respectful way, unlike Picard did in this movie. And especially for Patrick Stewart could call his shot at that time. He should have come out and said, I am not going to say that line. Forget you, but anyway, I'm sure that it came down to the director, and really that's the biggest problem, is that Stuart Baird doesn't really understand these characters. It's abundantly clear. People have brought this critique up many times against the film, that this was a director who had no experience with Star Trek, or particularly the Star Trek The Next Generation crew, and it shows. Like, things are just a little off a lot of times. In this movie, even though the story overall in the abstract is certainly a very interesting one. Plenty of plot holes to be had there. I can overlook those because every movie has plenty of plot. Pretty much every movie has plenty of plot holes. Anyway, those two, Stuart Baird's direction was a failure. Now here's where we twist into the good, because something that I used to hold as a negative for the film is that it's completely rehashing Star Trek II. But what I realized in watching the movie this time around, and I don't know why it didn't really click for me before, but very much the movie is trying to wrap up the previous 9 films. Not just the Next Generation, but even the original series, or the original series films. There are a lot of direct musical cues, as in music never used in any other piece of Star Trek history other than Star Trek the Motion Picture, that come from Star Trek the Motion Picture, that are in Star Trek Nemesis. Even visual cues of the Enterprise and Dry Dock and more are clearly pulling from Star Trek the Motion Picture. The plot line of Data and Picard's friendship, which in general I always thought was kind of crappy. It's like, no, Riker and Picard have that kind of friendship. Data and Picard do not. That doesn't make any sense. But whatever, they were pulling a Kirk Spock Star Trek II. Spock's going to die, in this case it's Data or whatever. And I understand that. But they do so much more. The Romulan ale jokes are straight out of Star Trek VI. There are consistent fan service Easter egg references throughout this movie that really bring the whole thing together. I mean, amazingly, there's even a point where they, when they're battling the scimitar, Shinzon, in the end, starship battle, where Riker says, initiate defensive protocol Kirk Epsilon. Like, they reference Kirk straight up. So I see what this movie, partly what they are trying to do is make it a swan song for every Star Trek movie that came before. I'm not going to say it executed it perfectly, but I get what they were going for. I still think that the really plagiarism, the theft, dare I say, of the plot for the high notes of Star Trek II is still a little overboard. I mean, even the revenge, like Shinzon's revenge fantasy is so similar to Khan's in Star Trek II. Again, it's a little overboard. But I get what they were trying to do, and I can applaud that. And really, again, like, so many weird little references in the film. Though, this is another area where I thought Picard was incredibly insensitive, to put it lightly, where Worf is protesting, he's like, yeah, I'm not going, because, Riker and Troy are getting married, and they're going to do a Beta Z marriage. And we all know from, season 1 of Star Trek The Next Generation, we know what a Beta Z marriage looks like. Everybody's naked. And Worf says, I'm attending, but I'm not going to go naked. And then Picard says, everyone will show up naked. That's an order. And it's like, wait, what? Like, you're literally ordering, like in Starfleet, you can order people to be fucking nude to expose themselves? No. Like, that's so anti Star Trek. Yes, Star Trek is incredibly sexually progressive as a show. And if Gene Roddenberry had his way, I'm sure he would have had the whole crew walking around naked all the time. And it would have just been seen as like, socially acceptable and all this. But that's wholly different than Picard ordering a crew member to show up naked somewhere. Like, what the fuck? Throw down your badge, Worf, and walk away and join the Klingon Empire. They seem to have more ethics than Starfleet does in that instance. As well as later on when, a decorated crew member, not that they had to be decorated to be respected and have dignity, are told they have to keep, stay on the bridge even though they just got raped. Crazy. Anyway, I don't want to concentrate on the negatives here because, again, overall, I really do like a lot of what they were doing with this film. And as Ellen really well pointed out, this is about Picard, dealing and getting past his younger self, and the whole movie, because you have to understand, and, you have to be a nut job like me about Star Trek where you read every interview at the time. This is, before the internet was where people posted these sorts of things. So you had to read in TV Guide or Starlog or wherever. The writers for this film made it very clear that if it did really well, that if Nemesis did really well, they were going to take Star Trek in a new direction and they were going to do some really exciting things with Star Trek. The suggestion, I think, was that maybe they were going to do another TV series. I think that's what they were pointing at, and not crazy that interview was in an issue of TV Guide. And, if that's where they were going to go, then, you can see Nemesis as being a rebirth, really, for the entire crew. This is them getting past a lot of their traumas. I mean, even Riker and Troy getting married is them getting past their past. And I think there's a very beautiful message, in that, where Picard can, again, he's the mirror for Shinzon. Shinzon was the mirror for him. And, seeing the darker side of yourself and being able to get past that, that can be pretty powerful stuff. And again, you've got to see the movie in that lens and have more of that context. And, here's the other thing. I mean, part of, that I admitted earlier with context, compared to Star Trek Picard, the show, this movie's a fucking masterpiece. This movie is Citizen Kane compared to that. Also, admittedly, Star Trek is just entertainment at its best. It's infotainment, frankly, at its best. And when you've been away from it for a little while, like Ellen and I were, and you come back to it, even when it's something like Star Trek Nemesis, you're just like, home, and you're like, yes, this is how it's done, I'm not throwing any shade at Stargate. But yeah, it's Star Trek and you feel it. And so watching it this time around, really felt good. And maybe it's just the barrage, not just because we haven't watched Star Trek in a while, but just the barrage of shitty entertainment in general. Not to say there aren't good shows out there. Andor is fucking great. There's stuff out there that's being made right now that's awesome. Okay, but by and large, it's crap. When you sit down and watch Star Trek, even if it's what you could argue would be mediocre Star Trek, it's so far above and beyond anything else being made. You just can't help but love it. And so, I want to be cognizant of that context. But man, there's so many, we're going into overtime. There's so many other things that I could say about this movie, but really it would be more complaining about Star Trek Picard. And do you really need anyone else on the internet to do that? There's already so many. Even hardcore modern Star Trek fans are still ripping on that shit. And thanks Satan for that. But anyway, there's a lot to love in this movie. And again, just even all the Easter eggs alone are really worth it. And I want to, except for Worf, I want to give the writers credit for giving most of the characters, including Troy, who often gets left out, some really cool shit to do, you know, and some really great moments, you know, some kick-ass moments. I mean, Riker even gets, you know, a nice battle scene in really huge Jeffries tubes, it looks like, aboard the Enterprise E. I mean, you get all that. Of course, we all would have loved to have heard more from Wesley. We didn't get that. And that's another thing, too. See, and this is one of my negatives, and I still feel this way. Let me be clear on this. Star Trek should have stopped with Insurrection. Insurrection is Star Trek coming full circle, where you realize, because of like the Baku and whatever, you know, with Star Trek Insurrection, with that film, you realize that you don't need all of that technology to enjoy life. You don't need all the technology. You know, you don't need to, you don't even need to travel among the stars to find the entire universe that exists within a single moment in time. I really, really think that Insurrection was Star Trek coming full circle and getting to much of what I think Gene Roddenberry really wanted to get to. You know, he was all about humanity becoming gods. And, you know, I applaud what he was trying to put out there. And I think that Insurrection kind of hit those notes. Now, we could also say that Star Trek should have stopped with All Good Things, or at least Star Trek The Next Generation should have stopped with the last episode of season 7, you know, the series closer, that being All Good Things. I'm open to that argument as well. But Nemesis really feels like a beginning into something that we never got, and it doesn't feel like a very good ending, as to where Insurrection feels like an amazing ending. But if you can appreciate Nemesis for the beginning that it was trying, new beginning that it was trying to be, much like Star Trek The Motion Picture was a new beginning, and it really was for Star Trek, then you can see it in a new light and really learn to appreciate that movie. And I certainly have a very new appreciation for the film. And again, like I said, feel very positive about it, much more than I ever have since it came out 20 years ago. So if you haven't watched in a while, give it another shot. And, you know, with what I talked about in mind, and you can let me know what you think of it, especially if you're in the Sovereign Tech Patreon only Discord, or any other ways that are available to reach out to me. And we will wrap up this episode of Sovereign Tech with that, and I will see all of you on the other side.